I am fascinated by human hands. You may think this is a little odd, but from the time I was a child, I found the artistry of the human hand something marvelous to look upon. It began when I was very young, and I know this because it was my grandfather's hands that sparked my curiosity. He was an interesting old man, my mother's father. His name was Otto. He was an old German man who wore bibbed overalls and had a laugh like a character from a Disney movie. He liked to tell jokes, and he would make my father laugh at jokes not meant for children, and I never understood. The adventure would begin when we took our drive. We would start off from Green Bay, Wisconsin, and we would drive west to Loyal, Wisconsin. And when we would get into that small town, we would drive through town past the Methodist church to a dirt road. And we would take that dirt road out of town. That dirt road was a magical road. It wasn't like any of the other dirt roads that I had ever experienced before. It wasn't brown or gray and dusty. It was red. It was red. I learned later that it was red because of the clay content in the soil, but the red dirt road seemed like we were adventuring off into a fairy tale. My brothers and I couldn't wait to get to Grandpa's farm, because when we got to Grandpa's farm, we knew we had freedom. This farm was still a working dairy farm, but it had very few modernizations. It had a tractor, but it still used workhorses for some of the farm chores, such as plowing and hauling big wagons of hay. There was newly installed electricity for lights in the farmhouse and for electric equipment in the barn, but the plumbing in the house only ran water to the kitchen, and so we got the outhouse experience my mom grew up with. Bath time meant we had to heat buckets of water on the new electric stove and pour that water into an ancient copper bathtub. For us, this was like stepping back into time, an adventure of marvelous proportions. I was very young. I was maybe 3 years old, and my older brother was 6, so I would tag along after him. On one adventure, my brother brought us down to the barn to show me Grandpa milking his cows. I can remember the smell of walking into the barn. It was the summer and it was humid. And you could smell the sweet feed and the hay and the manure just hit you right in the face as you went from the outside in the fresh air into the confines of the barn. You could also hear all sorts of sounds when you went in. There were cows munching on hay, occasionally mooing to their neighbor. Flies, lots of flies were buzzing around. All the while, there was this rhythmic sound of the old surge milkers. And they kept a cadence of time during milking. Some of the cows were milked with the surge milkers. These here were what they used. But my grandpa only had a couple of those, and so they would also milk by hand. Those hands. I would watch those hands as my grandpa would put one of these milking machines onto the cow's udder. And there was a sound, a suction, a vacuum sound that was made. And I would wonder, it would sound like the udders of the cow would hurt. Honestly, I couldn't understand how the cows could just stand there and let it happen to them. But they stood still and they munched on their hay. It was just a part of their daily routine. My grandpa would give the cow a rub and call her by name and then move on to the next cow, who would be milked by hand. My grandpa's hands. His fingers were thick and crooked. His knuckles were knobby and misshapen. Those hands were covered with tough, hard skin that had been darkened by years of working in the sun, plowing fields, handling his cows, horses, and chickens. They showed scars from years of maintaining the buildings and repairing machinery. Those hands told a story of a lifetime of back-breaking work, and they showed courage. Those hands ran a farm and illustrated the knowledge of caring for God's creation as he rotated crops, left forest stands and hedgerows for the wild animals, and cared for his horses, his cows, and his chickens with gentleness. Those hands raised a family and revealed tenderness as he parented 6 children and grandparented many more. At the age of 3, I didn't know why I was fascinated with his hands. I just was. They didn't look like my dad's hands. They didn't look like my mom's hands. They were different. I watched with unwavering focus. That is, until he started squirting us with fresh milk. Those hands also revealed a sense of humor as we giggled with surprise when the barn cats jumped on us and lapped the milk off of our hands and faces. Hands tell a story. I have often imagined what the hands of Jesus would have looked like. I wonder if they would have looked similar to my grandpa's hands. I wondered if they, too, would have been decorated with the scars and injuries from a lifetime of hard work, from work as a carpenter. Would blisters and splinters, broken skin, inflamed knuckles reveal what life was like before Jesus was baptized and moved into his ministry? Would the skin of his hands be leathery and hard from working in the sun as he crafted furniture and tools and helped to build homes from wood and stone? I wonder what it must have been like to be touched by those hands. The Gospels are filled with words related to touch: fingers, hands, embrace, touch. There's more than 200 references in the Gospels alone that reference Jesus touching people who were in need of something. So those hands, those carpenter's hands, those blistery, splinter-filled, scarred, and inflamed hands reached into the lives of the people around him. Those carpenter hands changed each person he touched. He changed them forever. He gave sight to the blind, healthy skin to the leper, and life to the dead. The hands of Jesus not only cleansed the skin of disease, but they also cleansed the mind and the spirit of defeating thoughts and behaviors that can lead to failures in life. His hands, with a gentle touch, could relieve the stress that makes life unbearable. You know what happens when we're stressed. We can't be productive. We can't focus. But we also can't relax or rest. It's as if when we're under stress, we are in no man's land. Jesus, though, can bring us quietness when we can't focus or relax. He can allow us stillness where we feel the presence of God. It is a reassuring touch. It's one that communicates that we're going to be okay. Those carpenter's hands. those broken hands touch us, and we experience illumination. If we're open to his guidance, that is, because it's in that openness that we are given more and more knowledge of God's compassion and grace. That touch of Jesus is a liberating touch. It gives us confidence to act on the gifts we have been given. And it allows us to be bold as we reach out in our faith. It is through liberating confidence that holy touch heals the brokenness all around us. What is so amazing about the hands of Christ is that his hands always convey love. Always. In the scripture for today, from Mark chapter 5, we are introduced to two women. These two women are at opposite ends of the social spectrum. The young girl is the one that we meet first. Actually, she's very young to us. She's 12 years old, but then she was just about to enter womanhood. She would have compared to someone in our day who might be 17 or 21. This girl belongs to an affluent family. Her family has social power. And now she has fallen sick and she's dying. And while she most likely would have been very socially active as the daughter of an affluent family, now she's isolated and alone, cut off from people and the community due to illness, which made her then unclean. Jairus, the father, a wealthy man and well-respected, is able to leverage any and all sources to care for his daughter, but nothing is working, and so he begs Jesus to come and heal her, and Jesus agrees to go. But now the story gets very interesting because Jesus is delayed in getting to the sick woman. There is another woman moving through the crowd. And this woman is also sick, but this woman is poor. She comes from the fringes of society. She's been sick for 12 years. She's been deemed unclean for 12 years. She has been cut off from community for 12 years because of a hemorrhage. The doctors couldn't heal her either. And tired of living a life of physical pain and social rejection, this woman takes her healing into her own hands, so to speak. Tired of living this life of physical pain, she moves through the crowd of people against the laws of the time, and she reaches up and ever so gently touches the cloak of Jesus, thinking maybe if I can touch his clothes, I will feel healed. I will become whole. And immediately her bleeding stopped. Immediately. Immediately Jesus stopped too. He turns to the crowds and he looks out there and he says, "Who's touched me?" His disciples think he's nuts. They're in the midst of a crowd. They say, "Look at all these people around you, and you want to know who touched you? Everyone's touching you." But Jesus knew a holy moment had transpired because power had gone out from him. And so he keeps scanning the crowd. He keeps looking. And finally, the woman knows that she needs to come forward. And so she does so. In fear and in trembling, she falls at his feet and she confesses. And moved with compassion at the depth of her faith, Jesus releases her from both her spiritual and her physical burdens, and he blesses her. Go in peace. Well, the delay has consequences. It means that Jesus does not get to the 12-year-old girl in time. Word comes that she has died. Jesus is told not to bother. There's nothing he can do. But ignoring what everybody is saying, he looks into Jairus' eyes and he says, "Do not be afraid. Believe." So they hurried and they went to the daughter's room, and the dead girl was laying there, and Jesus told her to get up. And she did just that. Do not be afraid. Believe. The touch from the hands of Jesus is an act of love, filled with compassion, with the power to transform lives. Sometimes we need Jesus to reach into our lives and touch us to heal us, but there are other times when we need to be willing to reach out and grab a hold of his garment. Because everyone has access to the touch of Jesus Christ. I'm reminded of the passage from Luke in chapter 4 where Jesus has been engaged in a really long day of ministry. In fact, he had just healed Peter's mother of a fever, and it was at the end of this day, and the ministry just kept continuing. And we read, "When the sun was setting, all those who had any who were sick with various diseases brought them to him, and he laid his hands on every one of them and healed them." The psalmist says, when speaking of God, "When you open your hand, they are satisfied with good things." It is with open-handed generosity that Christ reaches out to each one of us. In this Lent season, we are asked to reflect on our lives of faith and the practice of our faith. When you look at your own hands, what is it that you see? What is a story that they tell others? What are the stories we want them to tell? How can our hands, our fingers, our touch, our embrace become a blessing to another? How can they be open hands that convey what the hands of Jesus conveyed? If we have been touched by the life of Christ, then may our hands reveal his compassion, his generosity, and his love as we reach out to others in his name. Amen.